This panel switched from Saturday because of scheduling conflicts. The original time was on Saturday. Here we are with documentary production, and I'm so excited to be here. My documentary students are videoing this, and some are in the audience, and so this is perfect for that class. So thank you all for joining me. Let us do introductions. I'm going to start at the far end and go in order, because we have a little slide for each of you. Isn't that slick? Our students have that. First is Bryan D. Hopkins, who brings Dirty Energy to the festival. He's a producer, director, writer, and editor of Dirty Energy, a documentary that tells the stories of those personally affected by the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. The film was also screened at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. Bryan is Ohio-born and Aurora-raised in Ohio. After serving as a parachute medic in the 82nd Airborne Division and attending Kent State University, he traveled the world, as the program guide says, studying Asian culture and international politics. Bryan's previous film work includes the short horror film Ching Lo Nu in 2009, and his duties as DP, assistant editor, and associate producer on Runways and Bunk Beds, a narrative film based on true events behind the high fashion modeling world. And he also acted in his own 2008 short film, Sleepful Painless. So welcome, Bryan, please.
Thank you.
Next on board is Kristi Jacobson. Kristi's Finding North, co-directed with Laurie Silverbush, looks at hunger in America using interviews with folks ranging from celebrities and experts to children and moms. It is previously screened at Sundance Film Festival, where it was nominated for a Grand Jury Award. Kristi received a degree in sociology from Duke University and is an adjunct professor of documentary film at New York University. Her previous works include 2006's Toots, a biographical documentary focusing on the legendary and colorful New York bar owner and general celebrity Toots Shor. That film screened at festivals including Tribeca and Silver Docs. Kristi's also produced or directed a number of television documentaries such as Together, Stop Violence Against Women, and episodes for cable series such as Biography and America Undercover. Welcome. Next in the center is Stephen Kessler. He's presenting his new documentary, Paul Williams is Still Alive, at the film festival. This work spotlights the American music icon Paul Williams, who has penned such standards as We've Only Just Begun, many other Carpenter's tunes, and the song
Rainbow
everyone knows.
Connection.
I found when I have to say this. Yeah, but when we went, my family and I, my kids are now college age, we went to see The Muppets, not the Muppet movie, but The Muppets, the more recent film. It's the only movie I've ever been to where when that song came on near the end, the audience sang along. The whole audience sang Rainbow Connection. Yeah. So Paul Williams is, the subject of your film is such a part of American lore and American popular culture. Your film, Paul Williams is Still Alive, it has had numerous festival screenings, including Toronto and South by Southwest. A native New Yorker, Stephen is a graduate of Stanford University where he specialized in writing. And his previous works include the comedies Vegas Vacation, which he directed, and The Independent, which he wrote and directed. Also, his short film, Birch Street Gym, was nominated for an Academy Award in 1991. This is his first feature documentary.
And then I'm retiring.
Okay, after all that. Next, we have Martin Mudry. With his co-director, Alex Nichols, he is at the festival presenting his documentary Where Dreams Don't Fade. It's an examination of the sport of long-distance running as practiced in Kenya. The film focuses on 3 Kenyans who hang their hopes on running as a way to better their lives, both economically and socially. Martin is a native of Cleveland Heights originally, and he studied at Colorado College and Macalester College in Minnesota, where he studied psychology and filmmaking. And there in Minnesota met fellow running enthusiast Alex Nichols. Their journey to Kenya to make Where Dreams Don't Fade became both a personal and a filmmaker's journey. Also, this is his first feature film, but Martin was also a PA on J.J. Abrams' Super 8. Welcome, Martin. Finally, we have Geoff Yaw. Geoff's King Me is perhaps one of the funniest documentaries you might see at this year's festival.
Thank you.
I laughed. Absolutely.
My work here is done.
All right, thanks. It tells the tale of a network of checkers crazed people from far points around the globe, from Barbados to South Africa to Ohio. Geoff is from this area, the Cleveland area, and continues to work and live here in Cleveland. He works at Think Media Studios here in the Cleveland area. Since 2002, he's produced reality TV programming, documentaries, music videos, and ad campaigns. And according to his employer's website, he is an unapologetic consumer of all media, notably NPR's podcasts. So, welcome, Geoff. Again, this is a panel on documentary production. To me, that implies a wide array of activities. Could you comment, and anyone feel to jump in at any time? We're not going to go doggedly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I will try to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk on the panel. I'm sorry. First, I will have some questions with them, but we'll certainly open it up for at least a half an hour, maybe more, of questions from the audience. So be thinking of your good questions. So could you comment on the journey that you took from idea to editing, the whole production, the whole panoply of activities that are included? Anything noteworthy that you think student documentarists might need to know about documentary production in general? We'll start very general, and I have more specific questions later.
For me, it was kind of a unique thing. It was, I had directed a lot of short films and was currently in the process of raising money for a feature narrative film, and that's my background. I mean, I'm used to having actors and telling them exactly what I want, having the camera do exactly what I want, make sure the set is what it is, and it was in this situation where, the BP oil spill had taken place, and I myself was in a kind of a difficult spot, and I literally had $200 in the bank, and I was 250 actually, and I took the 200 out, kissed my wife, got a bag of groceries with food stamps, and I drove down to Louisiana and showed up in a parking lot, spent the night. And I figured I'd go to the first marina, where there would, of course, have to be a group of fishermen just sobbing. And I'd say, I've got a camera here, let me tell your story, we'll save the day. And I'll tell you that outside of the drive and the idea that I was really, really stupid for starting all of this, creeping into my head, none of that other stuff actually unfolded the way I thought it would, And I got to the marina, and I found fishermen, but they wouldn't talk because they were all on BP's payroll. And so began the whole story of living there, and out of that process I was there for I'd say about 2 weeks before I really got a substantial interview, and then after that they just kept coming, and my last day I did 4 hours of interviews and then had to drive all the way home for a film festival that my short film was playing at. So the whole journey to process, I went down with an outline. I was reading Wikipedia. I was doing my research while driving through the mountains of Virginia, reading Wikipedia articles, trying to...
At the same time?
At the same time, yeah.
It takes to be a director, man.
Yeah.
Drive and read.
I was calling crew. I posted a Craigslist ad, and I was calling crew that replied to the Craigslist ads as I'm driving, trying to do all this to multitask, because there was about a week from the time that I decided I was going to go that I actually left. And, and I posted on Facebook, and I just said, hey, if you ever want to see me again, send me some money. And I was fortunate that at least a couple friends wanted to see me again. So I brought that back. I ended up cutting a featurette from it, presenting it to an investor, and doing a second trip, and was able to do the before and after. And so I don't know that necessarily I'm the ideal as far as how a documentary can be made, but I think the most important thing is, if you know how to operate a camera, and if you have an idea of a story, you shoot it, and then when you get in the editing room, that's where the real battle begins. But the most important thing is to do it, and then the second step is to make sure you finish it.
I think that's a good point, though. There are, and I guess, I know my question was very general, but there are a variety of ways in which a documentary gets made.
Yeah, I think if you go across this stage, we're all
Well,
going to
let's-
have a totally different
Why don't we do
story.
that? I said I wouldn't do that, but why don't we go across the stage?
I mean, I'd say that in many ways, our film was made over the course of 3 years, during which we were in production the whole time, even though we were also in development, and then also in, so in theory it goes development, research and development, production, post-production. But in today's sort of world, in order to get the funding that you need, you often need to show a trailer. You cannot make a trailer unless you have footage. You get footage by being in production. So we sort of, began the research and development process, and quickly on a shoestring, on some funds that we'd raised through some grants and things, got out there in the field and started capturing footage and started filming. And I'd say for me, my journey on this film was completely different than the journey on previous films, but there's one similarity, which is something that you said, which is that, you often, you have an idea. You have an idea, which means you have some kind of vision for what your film will be about. So you think you have some answers, but in fact, you really are just filled with questions, and the journey that a film takes you on is often a very different one than you imagined. And I would say, the most important thing is to be open to that, to be open to discovering that the film that you set out to make is not necessarily the film that you are making, and it's your duty and obligation as a filmmaker to follow what is happening before you and what you're seeing and what you're learning and discovering. And that happened to us. I mean, a film about hunger in America, what does that mean? Who's going hungry? Well, it turns out that what we discovered was why people are going hungry, and the politics and the history of how we as a nation have been handling this were equally as important as how many are struggling. So, and again, that was just sort of a process of discovery. But then also just, again, to just further describe why we were in production the whole time, and then, so then in theory you shoot all your footage and you start editing, and then you're editing and you're figuring out a lot, the material's speaking to you, and you start really crafting the film in the edit room. And in documentaries, editing and editors play a very important role. But on this film, as we started editing, again, we started discovering there was more to the story that we didn't have. And so we were really, I was out in the field while the editors, editing team were at work. We were constantly in communication, coming back, screening, go back out. And I'd say we finished the last frame that we shot might have been in August, and we locked picture in November. So just to say that, the production period is one that's pretty fluid. You just have to be prepared to sort of go on the twists and turns that, as life takes you on those twists and turns, so too in filmmaking. So don't have blinders on.
Yeah, definitely. Most good documentaries that I've seen are born out of passion, and whether your passion is you want to learn about the BP oil spill or running, or in my case, this guy who I loved when I was a kid, and I thought the guy was dead, and I went to buy his album online one night, and I found out the guy wasn't dead, and it was like a time machine. I was like, oh my God, here's this guy. I loved him when I was a little kid, and now he's old, and maybe I could go find him, and I'm a director, and maybe I can talk him into letting me shoot him. But like you're saying, what did happen along the way after I met him, well, first of all, if you guys got the chance to see my film tonight, you'll see that he wasn't interested in being filmed at all. But so that's one of those cases where I was like, oh, so I'm not going to get to make kind of like a VH1 kind of documentary about Paul Williams, which is what I thought I was going to make. But when I saw who he was today, I started becoming interested in that guy today instead of the guy when I was a kid. So by being open to that, I was kind of able to make the film. But also the amazing thing for documentary filmmakers that are starting is pretty much if you have an idea, you could start, because the cameras are so cheap, and you don't need film, you don't even need tape. And even when I started the film, like, the cost of drives has gone so way down, and you can get an 8 terabyte drive for like $1,000 now, like painting, the materials aren't really an impediment for you to go. So if you just have something you really love and are interested in, and take the first step and see how it goes. With Paul, I didn't know when I started that I'd be filming him for 3 years. I started filming him for a few days. But really, as I've gone to documentary film festivals, everybody says that over and over. It's like, I didn't know I'd be working on this for 5 years. I hear it again and again and again.
And even if you've done it many times before, the next one, you're like, this one, I'm gonna be in and out, be done in a year.
Yeah.
3 years later, 5 years later, how did this happen? Because of the passion, I think.
Stephen, I hate to personally interject here, but I was just taken by the quote in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, quoting Paul Williams, who said that your persistence took you from stalker to family. So was that the process for you?
Yes, it was. Because I've been fortunate, or I guess unfortunate, to work with a lot of famous people, and I don't really get that excited to meet famous people, but Paul was someone I was really, really excited to meet. And so I was always scared when I talked to him. Every time I talked to him, I never wanted to call him again, and I'd film him, and he didn't feel like he wanted me there. And then I'd go to a new city, and it didn't feel like he'd want me there. He'd close the door in my face. And I was like, well, fuck him. I'm just going to keep going. That's it. So yes, it did go. At some point, he seemed to not mind having me around as much. But even today, he's not that happy.
Martin, how was your process?
Same thing with everyone else so far, in that it started with an idea way before thinking of making a film. I went to Kenya just for a personal trip to see if I could learn about how these men and women train. And I had a contact that literally bumped into 3 of the world's best runners while he was in Kenya just doing volunteer work. And that was the start for me. But once I got over there, with little expectations of what that trip was going to be like. Was I going to be able to run with them, live with them? Would they talk to me at all? Language barriers. That's where, once I was over there, the story was so much more unique and different than all the cliches I had heard over here and all the research I had done on what Kenyan runners, their background. And so I realized then that if I couldn't find this information by searching Google, by doing scholarly research, all the stuff I was trying to do while in college, it just wasn't really out there. But the reality was that the stories were unique. The cliches both existed and were completely wrong. And so the idea of, well, let's put a face with a name. Everyone knows Kenyan distance runners. Someday I want to come back here. Someday I want to make a film that personalizes these people that are the running machines that win everything. But that was in 2007. Sat on the idea till basically 2011. I was working in Los Angeles on big films, but very small roles, like the production assistant position on Super 8. And I think the product of being this generation and with the camera stuff going so cheap and the hard drives being possible, I had a friend who turned out to be the co-director, and he was the real push. Let's just do it. Let's do it on a cheap budget. Advice from people in Hollywood was the same. Don't worry about funding. If you can scrap together enough to get over there and buy the equipment, just try your first movie. Don't try to make it huge. And so that's what we did. And we had a small equipment package. All of our stuff fit into 2 Pelican cases. We took public transport all over Kenya, and had only a few contacts, and ended up shooting the film in 3 months while we were over there.
Did it change as you went along, though?
The idea?
Yeah.
A little bit, but from the beginning, once we established our 3 subjects that we had to follow, we had a time window, and so we just tried to get as much as possible on them, and we stuck to our plan, which was following their daily life and doing interviews, but doing interviews while they're doing their normal task rather than the talking heads. And so we just tried to ask as many questions as possible while doing that.
That's probably going to be my next round of questions, the technique in terms of narrative and voice. I mean, there are several things I could ask, but we'll get to that in a second. Okay, thank you. Geoff, how about
Sure.
your overall process?
From beginning of production to edit, we had I took a lunch with sort of a main character in the movie who made an odd request of me, but in that process I sort of learned about what would become the central part of our story. And from that point I had about 10 days to decide whether or not to shoot something. So me and some of the guys from the production company I worked for went and shot what was a championship match between a South African guy and the world champion of checkers, who's a fellow named Suki King from Barbados. And we shot that and did some research. And because we're based in Cleveland, a good part and a bad part about being in Cleveland is it's pretty easy to be a big fish in a small town. And we had sort of accumulated a couple of guys that we thought might fund something like this. And I kind of went to them and I was able to point to movies like Spellbound and King of Kong and say to them, hey guys, I have a couple of ingredients that are similar to what is in these successful movies. It's all there. Excuse my language. It's kind of up to me to fuck it up from this point. And I suppose they appreciated my sincerity. And about 4 months later, we were in South Africa, charting the life of a guy who was on a quest to become the world champion of checkers. That first look of footage that we shot is actually in September of 2008, and we shot in South Africa, and Barbados, and Canada, and several other places over the course of the next couple of years. And the editorial was quite long for our movie because I work for a small production company here in town, so we're actually doing our regular commercial work that pays the bills and keeps the lights on, and then on the side sort of building this movie that would become a first feature for all of us. So a little bit different, but Kristi and Stephen both make really great points in that you sort of start, what Kristi was talking about, you sort of start with a plan, but you have to be open to other things that happen around you. And a really good example of that I can cite is the guy who is the world champion of checkers in my movie. Everybody from the moment I started talking about him insisted that he was a cheater and that he cheated. And I went down a blind alley that took me to Edmonton, Canada, and endless conversations with people, really only to discover that these guys were all just jealous of this guy. There was nothing to corroborate him. That element of the story was never anything I could use. And Stephen's point that the barriers to entry are so minimal these days that, it's quite inspirational if you're a student to say, I have this idea, and Martin's story is really indicative of that. It's like he had $200 and a camera. He jumps in his car with a laptop, illegally reading Wikipedia while he drives, on his way to his set.
A lot of illegal things.
That is what is so great and potentially so horrifying about making a documentary.
I just wanted to add one thing. When you
Sure.
mentioned that quote that was written about Stephen, his persistence is what transformed him from stalker to family, or
Yes.
so it seems in the film. And I just wanted to just draw attention to that, because I think that, and also your arrival and him saying, him not wanting to be filmed. This is not a negative, it's more of a positive, because we all sit here because we did make films, and we probably got a lot of doors slammed, no's, as you said when you first went down and you expected everybody to open up. And I think that a common thread among all, if you look behind the scenes of most documentaries, there's a lot of moments, and I have a friend who's in the process of making her first film. She was one of the editors on my film, and everything was really easy for a couple of shoots, and then suddenly things became really difficult and people started to shut down a little bit. And there's just, that will always happen. And you will, first of all, no doesn't mean no, in my opinion, until you yourself have just beaten your own self down. But, it's inevitable that there will be obstacles and challenges and things that didn't go the way you wanted. And the thing that I try and remind myself when it's happening to me or to a friend is you're not making a documentary if that isn't happening.
Yep.
And my mother has told me, if ever you're working on a film and I do not get a phone call at some point during production where you are hysterical, that this is the worst project you've ever worked on, it will never turn into a film that you thought it would be. She said, then I'll worry. Now I happen to be emotional and go historical. That may not be your tact, and I don't recommend that. But the point being that just if you try and know that and just persevere, I think that's an important thing to keep with you.
Yeah.
Oh, go
When
ahead,
I
Bryan.
started my commitment into film industry, I designed this tattoo and I got it on my forearm. So every morning I look down at it. It reminds me, and it's no return. And and I had done a lot of things in my life, but then when I found filmmaking, I found my soulmate in a career. And so, about a week and a half into being in Louisiana, I tried to do two things and it was miserable. I tried to get people to talk to me at first and then no one would talk to me. And then the second thing was, well, I'm going to get my oily bird shot. What's an oil spill documentary without the oily bird? You've got to get an oily bird if you have an oil spill. And I was all over the place. I drove like Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, everywhere. And I'm like, where's the oily bird? You seen an oily bird? I need a picture of an oily bird. And I didn't get it. And because of the Corexit, dispersing the oil. And so there was nothing. And about
Please don't tell us you covered a bird in oil.
Oh, no. I ended up having to grab news footage off of YouTube and throw that in there. So there is an oily bird. But, but it was like 2 weeks into it and I was getting emotional and I called my mother and I was like, this is it. This is going to be the film. I finally found out to be the fraud that I thought I was. And it's not going to happen. And then sure enough, then all of a sudden the doors started opening. And it was, had I given up right at that point, I wouldn't have been there for that time that now all of a sudden the second part of the problem I had was I had a bunch of Louisianans who now wanted to talk to me and I couldn't get them to stop because they were saying all these different things that I had to sort between the facts and the emotion and all that other stuff. And then it, just became a huge sorting process. So it was, but it was good. But it was tough to push through. And I think that that's awesome that, everyone's got those stories.
We think we'd all probably have this. In my case, I have a B story of my movie is sort of an apartheid era white versus black versus white South African bureaucracy story, and there's a pivotal character named Colin Webster in my movie who is the white, sort of odd 20-year-old holdover from a long gone regime, and he at times via email and phone would agree to sit for an interview, and then 2 days later he would hear something about me and say no, and I literally my one American crew member that I went to South Africa with. We flew to South Africa not knowing if he would actually sit for an interview, to the point where I had a private eye on standby who was going to track the guy down for me if he stood us up. And we were, the whole time considering how we could make the hunt for Colin Webster somehow a part of the story if need be. I spent a day with he and his wife driving around Johannesburg convincing him that I was a nice person in order for him to eventually sit for the interview. But yeah, it's when you're spending other people's money, sitting on a $2,500 plane ticket, not knowing if you're going to get an interview that is pivotal to your story, it's a little freaky.
Yeah.
I can jump in. It ties in with one of my other potential questions, which is the notion of what I call the voice or the role of narrator. Who are the voices that you allow in your documentary? My students in documentary class, we talk about the old school omniscient narrator, where the filmmaker's voice is paramount or the focus. And more documentaries have had a diversity of voices, literally and figuratively, I guess I want to say. Do you use voiceover? In what instances do you? To what extent are the subjects the voices? To what extent is your own voice the narration of the voice that's being heard? Maybe I want to ask Stephen, I have not seen your film yet. Is the primary voice Stephen or is the primary voice Paul?
Well, yeah, I'm actually happy to answer this question because my film, I'm in my film and I narrate my film. The reason I'm in my film is because one day I was filming Paul in the street. He's like, this feels like bullshit to me. You over there and me over here. You come stand over here. And even when he asked me that, I didn't really feel like I was going to be in the film in the end. But it just seemed like the thing to do to get him to keep talking. When I started editing my film, I cut together about 20 minutes, and I wasn't in it at all. And a couple of my friends looked at it, and they said, you know, this is really boring. And you don't understand that the most interesting, weird thing about your film is that you're following around this guy who's not famous like he's famous, and he doesn't want you to follow him anymore. So when I went back and started editing the film that way, all of a sudden the film kind of started to happen. Now the interesting thing is, when I got done with the film, there's a lot of controversy in documentaries about whether the filmmaker should be in the film or not. Now, for me, it's a really fine line, and my own line was, I always felt that I was in my film only to illuminate who Paul was as a character. And anytime I was doing something where I was making a joke for me to be funny, or I just cut out every possible thing of me that I could. Now, when I started going to film festivals, the first couple of festivals I was at, I was rejected from, just because there are people in the world of documentary, like old school documentary people, who don't feel that the filmmaker should be a part of the film. But I really feel that because everyone has cameras now, because our phones have cameras in them now, it's not like when a documentary was made in the 1960s and filmmaking was a mysterious process and the filmmaker was over here and the people were over there. Everybody knows what it's like to be on film now. So to me, to not put yourself in the film is in a way more bullshit. I mean, it's not appropriate for every film. It's not appropriate for every film. But if it becomes part of the story and helps to illuminate the story, I think there's nothing wrong with it. It can be a very effective tool.
Yeah. I think Stephen touches on something. It's an interesting concept, because the catch-22 in documentary filmmaking is there typically are no real stars. I mean, you have in your movie a guy who used to be a star who still is a performer, but in the documentary world, the directors are the stars. I mean, you can't go sell it and say, well, you can say Tom Hanks is going to be in it, but that doesn't really happen that much. So it's tough. I mean, for me, I set out to make a documentary where you never heard my voice, because I thought it was better told through the people that were actually experiencing it. Truth of the matter is, not to the extent that Stephen did, my voice is in there quite a bit, just so you can contextualize what it is that's going on, because these aren't professionals. When you ask them a question, they don't always give you the context of the question. So, that was something that I wanted to do. I kind of halfway got there, but I actually agree with Stephen's point, because the fact that you're there with a camera changes the story, no matter what you do, in my opinion. So to pretend that this is a really 100% naturalistic experience, you do what you can, you do everything you can to make sure that happens. But the fact of the matter is, in my case, I end up in a South African township. Well, a bunch of American dudes in the middle of a South African township. There's nothing naturalistic about that at all. So you have to
That's a great point. No, we argued, my class saw Grey Gardens recently. I don't know how many of you have seen that.
Yeah.
But then we were listening to Albert Maysles in the commentaries say, oh, we know that the two Eddies were speaking just as they would if the camera weren't there. It didn't matter that the camera wasn't there, because we were outside packing the car one day and they talked the same way. But my class argues, indeed, the presence of the camera has an effect.
Well,
Go ahead.
I just want to say this really quickly. I'm sorry. Albert Maysles, I saw him speak. He's 91 years old now, and of course he's one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived. But because he made films the way he did, he has ideas. Like he said to this group of people, I hate when the subject is not in the middle of the screen. I hate when the subject is on the side. And now everybody puts the subject on the side, and I hate that. And then later that night, I got the chance, it was at a film festival, I got the chance to talk to him, and at the end he said, I'd really like to see your film. I said, well, Mr. Mason, I don't like it if people are on the side a lot. And he goes, well, it's okay if you know what you're doing.
I know what you're doing.
But I would just say, like, if you're a student, if you just follow your instinct, and there are no rules of what's right or wrong. If you look at, like, the Scorsese documentary on Bob Dylan, it's like some people he supers their name, some people he doesn't. Sometimes he uses a title card, sometimes he doesn't. He does whatever he wants to do, and that's what great filmmakers do. They follow their instincts, they tell the stories the way they want to tell them, and hopefully people relate to your story when you're done.
Yeah, you have to
And I
remember.
think-
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. Oh, I was just going to say that I think it also depends on how you define voice, because
Yes.
in the act of making the film is, so many decisions are involved. What are you shooting? What are you not shooting? And of course, you have hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage, or can, and edit it down into a 90-minute film. So there is a voice, or the filmmaker's voice, no matter whose actual voice you're hearing, whether it be narration or not. And so I think that, and I think that, what both of these guys are saying is, it all depends on the situation. Now, I do think, my mentor is Barbara Koppel, and she's a great, amazing filmmaker who also, worked with Al Maisels, and I believe in cinema verite. And I do think, I've been in a lot of situations. Yes, your presence is affecting the situation, but there have been plenty of times, both footage that wound up in my films or not in my films, where if you as a filmmaker are listening and open and relating to the people that you film over time, there does, a film I made 10 years ago, I spent a lot of times with Teamsters, a bunch of truck drivers who saw me, and it was the beginning of when we had the small cameras, and it was like I had this thing on my hand, but I don't actually think they conceived
there's an intimacy.
that I was filming them and it would be in a film, because it didn't compute for them. So I do feel that I was able to capture scenes and moments that were absolutely genuine and authentic cinema verite. That said, again, you find yourself in the edit room and you're trying to edit a scene, and the critical moment in the scene was the posing of the question or the exchange that took place. So I think that it all depends, and I also think that in terms of how one, I had the film I made, Toots, was about my grandfather, and a similar thing happened to me than happened to you, except your film did depend on you being in the film, because it was your search that was the more interesting. I was at a rough cut stage of my film. It was about, so my grandfather had this restaurant in New York in the 40s and 50s, and it was about Joe DiMaggio and Frank Sinatra and all these people, and he was famous but not totally famous. Anyway, a bunch of people suggested that I put myself in the film, that was the way to, it wasn't working. And I didn't think that I really had any, my grandfather was dead, but I wasn't searching for myself in making the film. And there was a bunch of family stuff that was going on that I thought was private, that other people said would make a great film. But at the end of the day, we found, what we figured, and this is with my team of producers and editors, what was missing was actually that the story was a story about New York City, and how New York City wasn't in the film enough, because his life paralleled the arc of New York. So in that film, I wound up not being in the film, because that's not what the film needed to be to succeed and to be a great film. I think, in another situation, it's always different. So it's just what is that footage, what is that story saying to you, and follow your instincts.
And you have to make the best film you could possibly make. And I think that, I don't know, I think rules are fucking stupid, because it's just whatever it is. You go in there and for me, after I'm done shooting something, I get emotional. I get I'm thinking, oh man, I go to the editing room and I feel like a complete disaster. And I just put my head down and I just work on the timeline, and I get a little piece and then I watch it back. Oh my God, that actually works. All right, I see how this is gonna go, and then it gets exciting again, and then you work through it, and then you get a rough draft and you're excited, but then you're like, well, I don't know, is anyone gonna get this? And you work that out, but you gotta let it breathe. It's a poetry. I love it. I love being in the editing room, because it's, you just let it talk to you. You let the people talk to you. When you sit and have a conversation doing an interview, you don't tell them lines that you want them to say. I do that when I do a narrative film, but two of my favorite scenes in Dirty Energy are not in the film. But that's because the flow and the nature of the story, that's what special features are for. you know, and even in narrative film, I, you know, did a Chinglo knew I had a dream sequence, and I edited halfway through the dream sequence and I stopped. And I just said, it's been here long enough in this story. It doesn't matter how relevant it is. You have to be cannibalistic. You have to be willing to chop off your arm, because once you put it out there in public, they'll chop it off for you if you didn't do it in the editing room.
Yeah, we call it killing babies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Martin, you haven't spoken on this
Yeah.
one, and I saw your film, and you commented before that you let the characters, the subjects, I should say, speak for themselves.
And I completely agree with what everyone said, that does not, it's not like that is more true at all. And the whole idea of how much the camera's influencing your subjects is another huge issue. But at the same time, like with our people, they were runners. And so it's like we were definitely influencing them, but at the same time, for 3 months when we're living right next to them and knocking on the door every day, they're going to get sick of the camera. They're going to have to still do something that's real. You're still capturing a real moment, even if you're affecting the moment.
You can feel it sort of drop away. You can feel it when that's happening.
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, exactly. And so that's what you do is like you get it to drop away before you turn the camera on,
Yeah.
so you're not wasting film, you're not wasting your own time. The person really wants you to film them because they want to talk a lot, you know, but you just pretend like you're filming for a few minutes, you know, keep the batteries off, keep them in the shade.
Did you shoot on film?
No, we shot DSLRs.
Okay. So you have that 10-minute run.
Exactly.
But saving the batteries, I mean, electricity was an issue for you?
It turned out okay, but
Get those kind of
yeah,
barrels
like power
running.
outages and stuff
Yeah.
like that, to not charge them up or dump into our hard drives and stuff. We were really good on that stuff in the end. It wasn't a bigger factor, but we wanted to keep our voice out of the film because I didn't want a movie where, you know, the two white boys from the U.S. are telling you about Kenya. I wanted it, even if we were there and it's still our voice, to be, you get to just have a window into a world, even if it's being affected by us. You get to kind of decide what's going on and have the subjects talk to you. So they do all the voiceover in that
Very
sense.
good, yeah. Good representation of various options.
I think if you read between the lines of all that, basically what we're saying is make it be in service to the story. Whatever works for the overall story is what. Don't worry about all the rules. People gave Errol Morris a bunch of crap for doing reenactments when he made Thin Blue Line, and that sort of happens all the time now. So.
And use of his Interrotron.
I just made my own cheap ghetto version of an Interrotron. It's kind of a cool experience.
Oh, you have your own Interrotron.
Yeah.
Well, should we explain to them what an Interrotron is?
My version of an Interrotron is a teleprompter that you put in front of the screen, and I use Apple Talk through my laptop and the webcam that's on my laptop, and I get close enough. Basically, the subject is looking at your image, but your image is projected onto the lens.
Right.
So they're looking into the camera and talking. I didn't use it on my movie, but I recently moved it on a doc I'm doing for PBS right now. But it's kind of a neat experience if you guys have ever experienced it. It's kind of odd because you're looking at them through in my case through the laptop screen.
So you're basically you're creating a situation in which you're having straight eye contact with your subject. However,
it's through technology.
They're actually
though.
right. It's
Yeah.
not.
And then the resulting footage.
It's called an Interrotron, or the original
Yeah.
version of it was Errol Morris using it, and it was called an
Morris is much more complex, and I think he sometimes is even out of the room.
Yeah,
Right.
he
Like,
likes to be out of the room.
If you watch Fog of War,
Right.
you can hear his voice, but it sounds like he's screaming from another
Right.
room. But he
Right.
sets up an elaborate set of microphones and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have the money for that, so I
No,
sort
he's
of
in
I
the-
ghettoified mine.
In the documentary, A Short History of Errol Morris, he says he likes to be out of the room,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of, he likes to be removed, and yet they're looking at him. So again, the footage that is obtained
Yeah.
has the subject looking directly at you, the audience, directly at the camera, which is not the typical setup.
which is because we're talking about production, which is a choice that you make when you're in the field, which is the eye line, which is where where is your subject
Yeah.
going to be looking
Yep.
for a viewer when they're watching the film?
Yep.
Are they going to be looking directly into the camera? Well, if you're interviewing them, the only way that's going to happen is with an Interrotron. Are they looking just off camera so that the viewer watching it kind of feels like they're looking into their eyes, which is kind of what I often do, or are they looking more off camera, which is telling the audience, like, this is a documentary, this is a film, this is how we shot it, and this is there are a whole bunch of stylistic choices in addition to choices about content that you have to make on any given day.
Well, that's fantastic. Great. If we could expand this, one more question before we open it up to the group. Yesterday, a panelist said that documentaries today are looking a lot more like narrative films, with the use of reenactments, animation even. Some of you have that, and other post-production special effects. Kind of more elaborate editing, use of music. Any comments on that? The idea that documentaries now have a wider tool set available in this. Do you like to use that? Is that does it depend on the project?
Depends on the story and whatever's in service of the story. I mean, you don't make something that it's not supposed to be. I mean, it's just. But that's the thing, pulling yourself out of it. Making yourself, a servant to the film as opposed to, I'm the director and I'm going to make you into something. It's just whatever serves the film. I mean, I think it's great that we're trying to make information sexy. I mean, and adding, more rawness and stuff like that. I don't really appreciate the formality, but I think it's sort of indicative of how we as a society ingest and experience the world.
I think that we're all storytellers, whether you're using nonfiction, documentary, or fiction. And I mean, for me personally, to have the budget, for example, on this last film that I worked on to get some aerial shots and work with a really terrific animator and get some really, beautiful high-end animation to support my storytelling. And I just got really, really lucky and worked with an amazing music producer, this guy T-Bone Burnett. Oh, wow. So, that's great. If you have access to those things, then hopefully it's going to help you tell your story. But if you don't, and you have a small camera and it's you and your 2 Pelican cases and you're out there and you're capturing amazing stuff, it's all about the story at the end of the day and the experience that the audience has. And ultimately you're probably going to have music because that's important, and maybe some graphic elements, but maybe they're going to be really, really simple, and that's what you need. So, I mean, I guess you have to be, or at least I have had to be, and I'm guessing everybody here has or will have to be, flexible and adaptable. Do you have, is it a story that really needs all these bells and whistles? Do you just have the opportunity to have them, and will it make it better? Do you not have them? You just sort of need to always be a chameleon in some ways, in my experience.
I think that the idea of it being a trend, because there's a momentum behind the trend, because it is cool that you can combine it all, and it's now blurring that line between documentary and fiction, which always should have been blurred and was blurred. But in general, what's happening with production values becoming more accessible and open is that then you get the oversaturation. So, it might be cool at first and whatever it is, but then like with DSLR cameras and everything's in shallow focus. Oh wait, nothing's in focus. Like, why am I watching this? And we shot with DSLRs and wanted to experiment with that a little bit, but then very quickly we were like, we're not using f1.2. We're gonna keep it at f7, and other stuff. It was experiment with it, but already the cliches, they go so quick now. Yeah. Well, by the time you get on the bandwagon and the time your thing comes out, it's over. So it's more the idea of, I think what's neat is that there can be a diversity. You can have a film like ours, whether it works or not, that has no music, has no voiceover besides our subjects, and you can have...
There's no music in your film?
No, besides what was in the background.
Incredible, man. Yeah. That's incredible.
But then you can have stuff where it's like, 3D glasses, animation, this and that, and it can actually work as well. Yeah. That's what's neat, but it's not just jumping onto it because
it's the next 3D documentary.
Well,
that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Herzog.
Pena.
And Herzog did the one about the French caves.
Mind blowing.
Wow.
It's totally mind blowing.
Which one? I haven't seen.
Pena, it's called. It's Herzog. No, it's
Werner
Wim
Herzog
Wenders.
did.
The cave of the...
It's about
Pena,
the dance choreographer, and it's incredible.
But there are 3D docs now. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's 3D everything.
Bandwagon's moving. Anyone else? Or
I just have a question for all of us. I'm just curious to know what everybody shot on.
Sure.
Okay.
HVX 200. Boom.
70, Canon 70, and Canon 60D.
I shot on the HVX also. Louder. HVX 200.
I shot HVX 200 and the HPX 2000, the bigger.
But I'd say that camera's an outdated camera.
The 200 now.
Yes.
I love it.
I did
Although
a
it's pretty nice.
Canon 7D, Canon XH-A1, and the HV20.
Okay.
So all digital
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, no film.
or tape.
Yeah, no tape, right?
Dude here
Well,
had the
I
expensive stuff. This guy had the good stuff.
Got
Well, no, at
boxes
your
and
screening, you
tapes.
said you didn't spend that much for your
I mean,
setup.
those two cameras, cheap sound equipment, and the Pelican cases. That was our budget plus
Yeah.
a plane ticket.
What'd you use for sound?
The lower Sennheiser,
Just
like 66.
Onboard?
No,
Wireless?
we did it separate. So
sorry, folks. It's gonna get nerdy here for a second. I apologize.
co-director was filming, and then
Okay.
I had a Zoom
You did
H4
Zoom,
and
okay.
or whatever, and a shotgun mic that I would just point.
Yep.
I was the one asking questions or talking, interacting, so I would move around and just stay out of shot.
Cool. I haven't seen your movie. How'd you do the running stuff?
We did have a very basic Steadicam.
Okay.
I think it's called Steadicam Merlin.
Yep. Oh, so the like pole with the weight.
Yeah, it's got like a little loop to it, and we did a few running shots in cars from that, and then also just running alongside, which was really hard. But we got a few uphill stuff. with that.
Since you brought that up, I think as long as the panel's about production, we should note that more documentaries get sunk because of bad sound than anything
Yes.
else.
Thank
So-
you.
Yes.
Thank you.
So you should definitely pay a little attention to your sound, and you can get cheap mics that do great sound now, but definitely.
Yes.
And actually, in the beginning, one of the big challenges for me is Paul never wanted to wear a microphone.
Yeah, that's what you
And
do.
at some point, I had to say to him, "Look, you got to wear a mic, or I got to go."
Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
that wasn't a pleasant day, but pay attention to your sound.
I mean,
Thank you
and
so
the-
much. I always tell my students, yeah, you can have a
A great
documentary with
example of
sound,
it, right? You can
sound
have
without
picture,
images.
Exactly.
Yeah,
If you've got picture and bad sound, unusable.
Yep.
Sound and no picture.
you can work with it.
Yeah.
It's 50% of the experience when you really look at it like that. I mean, it's sound and image.
Or a really
so-
good soundtrack.
Yeah, no shit. Yeah.
All right, I think we shall open it up for questions. You're first.
Yeah, actually, I have two. For those of you who shot with a DSLR, would you recommend that for shooting documentaries? Because my impression, not having done it yet, is that it's probably not the best choice. The other question is, when you go into making your documentaries, do you go in already with an idea, okay, here's my storyline, this is what I'm going to be shooting towards, and I'm going to use close-ups on this instead of wide angles or whatever. Do you have that kind of a vision before you do the shooting?
Well, I mean, you have to figure that out when you do your first interview, don't you? I mean, you're setting it up, so you have to decide what you're going to do. So, I mean, I never show up and do anything really on the fly. I'm always thinking in advance. But I always set up two cameras. I'm going to shoot, a wider shot. I'm always going to, have a little safety net there since I'm shooting everything in 1080p. And then I'll have another camera shooting on the side. I mean, the Canon XH-A1 is a $500 camera, and over half the footage of my film was shot with a $500 camera. But the XH-A1 did a much better job. So, and with the tape, I was able, in Louisiana, you had incredible heat. So the digital SLR, the big problem is you run that camera, and after you run it in, say, 100-degree heat, you're going to run that camera twice, and then you're going to get the overheat button, and then you have to stop. Yeah. And then you lose all the natural flow of anything that you ever built up with the person. And you say, oh, sorry, we got to stop, and we have to wait a couple minutes, and then turn it back on. With the XH-A1, I didn't have that issue. And I was able to roll a lot longer, especially in high heat, high humidity situations. So, I mean, there's a benefit to the tape, and I haven't used the other camera that you guys were talking about.
It just shoots to P2, so you can
Right.
go as much memory as you have on that
Right.
P2 card is what you have. I mean, the biggest, and Martin probably the person who should speak to this most, but I use DSLRs in my day-to-day production. There's an inconvenience because you have to reslate every 10 to 12 minutes depending how daring you are, because those cameras when you're they're not originally designed to shoot video.
There's no sync sound.
Yeah, there's no sync sound, so you have to go old school and slate all your stuff so in post you're not killing yourself. I mean, it's a stylistic choice. So when you're capturing audio to a separate device, you have to put the sound and the picture together in the edit. And you've seen the slate board before. They say take two, and they go like this. That's most people's favorite part of a set. That sound exists so that you can sync up the image with the sound. And with video cameras like the ones that the other four of us used, you don't have that. So Martin's actually very brave in that respect, because there's a whole set of parameters that we didn't really have to deal with.
With the sound issue, the sync sound, that turned out to be a lot less an issue than I thought. I was
Really?
kind of terrified of that. We shot
Sure.
42 hours of footage, and so the idea of having to link that up by hand was terrifying. Basically, the
discovered
camera
the
still did record audio, and then
From
we're
scratch.
recording second, and found a cheap program online for $150 called Pluralize.
Yep.
And we messed around with it first, and first we're like, oh, we don't have to do anything, and then it was like, nope, it's not working.
It's a little imperfect.
But we
it
would
works.
just yell like A shot at the beginning, yell into both mics, do the same at the end, cutting B, and we basically got to where 90% would sync up automatically. We just click a button, and so that aspect worked fine. The big problem, and it's a problem for all filmmaking, is focus. And so you've got this shallow depth of field, or even just really sharp image, but now you have to keep things in focus, otherwise looks like you're making a lot of mistakes.
Right.
And it's been interesting going to the film festival and watching a lot of movies, and some of it's hard to tell, is it the projection that's off and this and that, but I for myself tried to analyze the job we did, and I think we pulled it off for the most part, that we didn't have it seem like there were too many focus issues, but at the same time there were a lot of shots that was just like, nope, not going to use it, not going to do it, check it again.
And also remembering when to hit stop and start.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. You could get
And
mixed
and
up.
I'd say also,
sure.
I've never worked with that camera, but when you are directing and shooting at the same time and or doing sound, I think it seems to me like that's a frightening scenario, because I'm a self-taught cinematographer, and so when I'm shooting, there are times where I use autofocus because I really need to focus on a lot of other things, like listening and engaging and how am I covering the scene and everything else. And now if you have a DP, a director of photography, specifically using that camera, that's like a situation I might feel more comfortable in, but again, not having used it. But if you're a first-time director and you're going to be shooting and directing and producing possibly, that might be a challenging situation, because so much of your attention will need to be on whether it's in focus or not, or following the focus. So it's just something to think about.
Is that why you went to a smaller aperture?
Oh, I was saying that as an example, that a lot of people who use those cameras, they use them at the really. Oh, you're right, exactly. That is. I'm sorry, I misheard you. That is why we went to that, as well as we didn't want that look. We didn't. Kenya's beautiful, and we wanted that experience, and so.
You want everything to just be blurry behind.
Yeah, we don't want like everything to be nice and hazy, or these head floating and
Right.
stuff. It's another reason we shot in 30 frames per second rather than 24, which a lot of people would tell you never to do that, and I don't know if that was the right choice, but it was motion. We were capturing running. I don't want everything to be blurred out, and to get that kind of floaty effect, I want it to feel more like the audience is there, like we were. So I think the main thing is knowing why you're choosing the equipment, which is what everyone's saying. And so for most people, even myself, I don't know if I'd want to go that route again, because then you could put your time and energy into other things.
And you would recommend people just getting started, I assume, to research the equipment that they're going to rent or purchase, but also talk to other users. Go to
Yeah.
film festivals and talk to people who've used it.
Absolutely.
Don't believe the hype.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great advice.
And it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
So talking to people who are using it and who have had the most recent experience using it,
Right.
and asking that question.
When I started making our movie, the 5D was not on the market. I reshot an opening sequence to our movie, and I did use the DSLRs, but it involved no talking. It was just supplemental video that we shot. So I love those cameras. I don't know what decision I would make if I started making King Me this year. I don't know if I would choose it or not.
Yeah.
I think your decision was brave, because they have it's a beautiful quality to those cameras. I haven't seen your movie, but I imagine it looks great. I would probably be quite jealous of it.
Well, and there's a couple things. Like the first, I guess two things. One is if you're dealing with low light situations, okay, being able to have that lens power is going to allow you to do that. And I didn't the first trip I went down, it was just me, and I had just bought the camera, so I was a little bit unexperienced with them, and it was so difficult. I listened to the audio when I was doing my editing, and there was all these ums and ahs coming from me, and I was like, how did these people not shoot me? Like, the first thing I did is I edited all my questions out because I couldn't stand listening to myself, and the reason was because I was dealing with audio, I was dealing with lighting, I was a one-man band. When I went the second time, I had a crew, and I had one other person, so I still carried all the camera gear. I still had, I had two people, but the other guy hadn't had any film experience, and he was more of a researcher and moral support. But the second time, I was amazed when I listened to myself do the questions, a lot less ums, a lot less ahs, and a lot more strategy in the conversation, where I was able to elicit certain things. So when I went in the editing room, the proof was in by having just one more person who was competent in the basic elements of sound and lighting and camera, I was able to exponentially improve not only my state of mind, but the questions and where I could direct the subject. And so my film is 70%, maybe even 80% that second trip, because of the quality of just being able to pull what I want out of it by being able to steer the conversation and not have to worry about the technical stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Other questions?
Very freeing.
Can you say the name of your camera a little slower, please? The name of your camera.
Brian?
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I use the Canon XHA1,
Well, you can,
XHA1.
They make it very easy for
That
you
was
to keep
the
track of your
$500 one?
equipment.
That's around $2,000. There's the Canon HV20, which I don't think that they even have anymore. They went to the HV40, and that's a small little consumer grade camera. But the sensors are very similar with the other one. And then I use the Canon 7D, but we used it purely for B-roll because it was just entirely too hot. And those cameras do overheat, and I don't know that they've developed radiators for those things, but they probably somebody out there working on that. That's the digital SLR. And that just,
That's the one that he used also, right?
Correct.
Yeah. But that was your primary, right?
Yeah,
The
and
5 and the 7, right?
Right.
no, 60 and
60D?
60 and 7.
Irene had a question? And then Jordan?
My question is for Martin. How did you handle your lighting back in Kenya? I know, did you use more natural lighting?
We did. It was all natural lighting. That was one of the reasons we went with the DSLRs. Was we thought if we're inside a lot in someone's small house in a hut with no electricity in a rural area, we envisioned a lot of inside interviews like that. In the end, we didn't have as many, but it still was pretty amazing that you can, get down to those f4 and start cranking up the ISO, and that was a pretty amazing thing. But
It's all 220 current there.
I just plugged and played. It was
Good for you.
it worked.
Jordan?
Two questions for the whole panel. Two of you commented on calling mom. Is that a requirement? And if your mother still speaks to you. The other one is, did you have formal film training, either graduate school, undergraduate school, and how helpful was that?
Oh, all right. We can.
I feel like I've been talking too much, so I'm gonna be quiet.
Let's start on that side. Put him on that seat.
I wasn't required. In fact, I called my wife more than I called my mom. Martin and I both went to Africa, which when you tell your family you're going to Africa, they get a little freaked out. But and what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Do you have formal film training in school?
I do. I have a degree in business that I got from the illustrious place of Arizona State University, which is really a pantheon of academic excellence. And then I actually went. When I was in my late 20s, decided I wanted to become a filmmaker, and there's a great community college in Scottsdale called Scottsdale Community College, and I went there for almost 3 years, ignored all of their tracks, and just took every filmmaking class that I wanted to for almost 3 years. So that is my formal training. But that was a fantastic program that I recommend to anybody. They make you make films on 16 millimeter in that program. And I learned a ton. It was tough. Sorry, go.
Calling mom on this one wasn't as big of a deal because it was more the first time going to Kenya, which I was younger and everything else. But kind of similar was with the person I was making the movie with, who was a good friend. You know, you're living with the person 24/7, and I got to a point where I realized for 100 days we had no more than 3 hours apart, and that was maybe if I went on a long run and he did not. And we would cook like every single thing together, and that was pretty intense. But we found that running together made it like a break in terms of from the filming. We were finally able to shut off our differences that we had, this and that. So just a little story on that. But in terms of formal training, I had a bachelor's in psychology from Macalester College. Took film courses there, but they were much more geared towards the art world. So I learned about curating and gallery installation and experimental documentary video, not, history of film, which I think was great, but that's why I went out to Los Angeles as well, was to get that other side and experience that world.
I don't have any. I didn't go to school. I don't have any formal film training at all. I mean, I wish I did. I probably would have helped. But I got a job in advertising as a writer. I'm a writer, and the first commercial set I ever went on, where it was an ad that I wrote. I looked at what everybody was doing. I was like, okay, I see what the costume person's doing. I see what the person who's dragging the lights around is doing. And I see what the person carrying the wires is doing. What's the director doing? The director's just standing there doing nothing. And I've already done the hard part, so I could probably do that job. And that's how I became a director.
That's great. Kristi?
I have no formal education in film. I studied sociology at Duke University, and it became critically important to me in terms of how I approach my films. But I learned everything I know practically from, my first job was as an unpaid intern, AKA student, and I just sucked it all up every shoot I was on. What are you doing? Why are you carrying that cable? Why are you going like that when you roll it instead of like this? And I just asked a lot of questions, and I worked for many years with a lot of great filmmakers, but including, as I mentioned before, Barbara Koppel, and so that was
That's a school.
That was a great learning ground, yeah. So I'm one of the ones that called my mother. But to bring that up, I think that the point raised, though, is whether it's your mother, your husband, your brother, your sister, your friend, is that it's an incredibly intense experience making a documentary film. And I don't want to speak for all of us, but there are moments of self-doubt, inevitably. And
Great moments of depression.
yeah, and you want to have a good support team, whoever it is. And I've got a list of people that I can go through.
Those moments can last a couple of years.
And I'm not. And then, but the great thing, just to throw something a little bit off topic about it, is that I find, and even feel it here, is that the documentary community, and I'm in New York, and so it happens to be that that's the community that I'm a part of. But wherever I go, it's a community of, like, I'm that phone call for a lot of people, and I'll take that call, whatever day, time, whatever it is. And, while the business of it is maybe a little dirty, as all businesses are, the sort of art of the filmmaking, I feel there's a great community and a lot of support for. So I just encourage that, you just seek that out.
Bryan?
With regard to Mom, it was a week that when I was watching Billy Nungesser getting emotional CNN, and I screamed at the TV, I was like, fucking do something. I threw something across the room to the time I got in my car. So I didn't really have much of a support structure when I went down there, and it created an enormous amount of external pressure. After I came back from the first shooting, it was like, how am I going to edit this? I have no idea how I'm going to make my car payment next month. So, I'm telling you this right now, I literally have $100 in my bank account today. I have no idea how I'm supposed to make it to Dallas in 2 weeks. But somehow the universe is going to provide, and somehow it happens. And it's done it my entire film career.
I love this guy.
But no commitment. No fear, It's sort of like, what are you going to take away from me when I have my soulmate, my joy, my happiness, and who would I be if I went to my wife and my son? I have a daughter that's literally, I'm waiting to get the call. My wife's pregnant. She's due any day now. She's 80% effaced as of 2 days ago. She's 1 centimeter dilated. I'm not even sure I would be here. But the reality is, like Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss. The universe provides for you when you do the right things and you follow your heart. So calling mom, she's gotten that phone call since I was a little kid. I was in Egypt for the first Gulf War, doing missionary work. I was in Alaska, homeless for a while. I mean, she's gotten that call before. And then the other part of the question about formal education, my degree was in comparative religion and culture, which I traveled abroad, and then now I have about $100,000 in student loans that I definitely have no means of paying or anything. So as far as that goes, I wasn't going to any nice.
Follow you around.
I wasn't even able. Like, there's no. I was in the mortgage industry and it collapsed, and I had some money in my 401k, and I lived on unemployment, and I cashed out my 401k, took the penalty. That was the down payment to get into a trade school that taught film. That was a 1-year program led by a guy who does a bunch of really low budget horror films. And it was all I could do, but it taught me the nuts and bolts of what it is to make a film. And literally it was my unemployment checks and, that paid my entry fee to school, and that and cheap liquor, and you're good to go.
All right. We have time for about a couple more questions. How about you?
I'm interested in what everybody's next project is.
I am too.
We might all give you that same
It was
answer.
the one question I was told I should have answered before my film goes in the film festival, and I don't. But that's because, this was 1 year and it felt like a long time, and I realized I got really lucky that it only was 1 year and it only was the amount of money we put into it and everything else. And so I think it is, even if you want to go super commercial, if you want to view it as a job, it's just still so much time involved that you're going to have to care about it for quite a long time. So just trying to figure out what makes sense for next.
Go ahead, Kristi.
No, I too always dream of the day I will be at a film festival and answer that question with, this is what I'm working on right now. You can follow it on the hashtag whatever. But I mean, I think there are lots of filmmakers who are able to do that. Personally, for me, making this film and my previous films is like climbing Mount Everest. And I've just gotten to the top a few months ago. And so I'm starting to begin the training again, the emotional and physical getting ready. And I'm exploring a bunch of ideas and talking to a lot of people, and hope to get going up the mountain again soon. I'm going back to my roots in sociology. I'm looking into some ideas that originally motivated me to get into film.
Well, Bryan, you said you're going to Dallas?
Yeah. My film just premiered in Santa Barbara
So
in January, where we ended up winning and taking the Social Justice Award. Nice. And then played in Detroit and Omaha a couple weeks ago, and then I'm here, and then we're in the next 2 weeks. There's Dallas, and then there's AMC in Kansas City that I'm in, and and it's kind of crazy right now. Again, I'm not fucking around. I don't know how I'm gonna make my car payment. So I've applied. Yeah, if anyone wants to help, by all means, I'm taking donations. Yeah, well, unfortunately, if I'm with my wife and I can't feed my other son, then it's no, seriously, it's a tough road as an indie filmmaker. I've committed to this path, and I'm going to do this path, and luckily I have a beautiful Asian wife who just says, okay, and luckily I've got a grandfather that lets me live there and whatnot. But that's it. All right, anyways.
So do you have another film project?
I have another film project. When I was in Santa Barbara, the fund that I got my award from actually had grants, and never did a grant or anything like that. So I submitted to them. on a documentary on nuclear energy, called Fallout. So we'll see what happens with that. But then I'm still trying to find a way to get funding for my narrative projects because I have scripts that are written and, so it's all over the place. But, you got to survive. So, if anyone has a project and they have funding, by all means, I'm a prostitute. I'll do it.
I just want to add one more quick thing
Okay.
about what's happening next, because you mentioned going to the film festivals, and a lot of times, what I didn't mention in terms of my near future, a lot of it is about getting this film out there. And luckily, I'm working with a company called Participant Media, who has a department that works on the social action campaign. But what I find and what people end up surprised about sometimes is like you think that you climbed the mountain and you got to the top, and then there actually is a whole nother mountain to continue climbing, which is the mountain of if you made a film about an issue and you're really trying to affect change, there's a lot of work. Or if you made a film that you just want a lot of people to see because it's an amazing story, it's a lot of work. So one can never prepare for that, but I just thought I'd throw it out there for all of you to think about that. So you got to muster up like a little extra energy to keep going when you think you finished the marathon. Or mountain.
Stephen and Jeff, next projects.
I'm going to be working with actors for money. You can't. You can't. It's very, very difficult to make money doing documentaries, but I can say it's been the most amazing life experience and most amazing creative experience I've ever had making a documentary. and I really loved it, but I also have children that have to eat. So.
Eventually, do you see yourself doing something else again involving like this?
I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know. I don't. I mean, I've loved the experience so much. I would have to have the same passion for it. And there are so many really wonderful documentary filmmakers. So I don't know.
Very good, thank you. Jeff?
I might be the lucky one. On Tuesday, I will begin with my editor turning 120 minutes into 27 minutes for a regional PBS documentary that's a local story. And then...
Wait, of your film? Or
No, something else entirely. I was
got it.
commissioned to do something for PBS a couple of months ago. So,
What is it? What's the story?
it's about the near death and resurrection of Playhouse Square.
Oh.
Yeah, I think most people think they know that story, but we uncovered some pretty cool stuff there. Part of that might entail me talking them into it actually being longer, because it's quite a long story, and it's actually got some cool, interesting parts to it. And then we're also in talks, not even anything worth mentioning on this stage, with 2 other projects. Actually, one which was mentioned on this stage at the last panel. But that's all. That could all disappear in smoke like most things in a week, so I won't talk about those.
Well, we're kind of officially out of time. Who has a quick one-shot question in the red?
You all mentioned the importance of sound and mics and things like that, and I only got a note about one specific mic. Are there any other suggestions that you have for sort of not terribly expensive, but will get the job done sort of sound equipment?
The Tascam, go ahead.
No, you go.
The Tascam DR40 just came out in the fall. A lot of people are using the Zooms, but this is actually $100 cheaper. So like $180, you can get great audio. And I highly recommend it for everything. But the mics, it has an XLR input, so you can run some mics into it. So you should have something like that at bare minimum.
You really get what you pay for with sound equipment. And there's a lot of information online, a lot of people talking in a lot of forums about, I use this and I use that. You don't need the most expensive stuff in the world. Also, I would suggest buying mics used from disillusioned filmmakers who have enough. There's always those sitting around.
And sound people, sound recordists have to always have the latest, or want to always have the latest, and so they're often unloading last year's model, which really doesn't make a difference to you as long as it's a high quality.
eBay's your pal.
Yes.
And then really there's so much information online, there's so many film forums, like we could probably go on for days spitting out model numbers to you, but really go on the film forums, because I mean there's a lot of
do you have
valuable
any to
information.
recommend, those, especially those doing
Creative
documentaries?
Cow.
Creative Cow's great. What was the
Shooting people?
How dare you?
Maybe they're gonna have to
Okay.
rename that.
Well, we are out of time, and you guys will probably stick around for a couple of minutes to interact with the audience. We appreciate that. Thank you so much for coming by.